Well, so thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you all for being here. And it's only downhill from here. So I feel like the thing is, for me, this has been also an incredible learning experience. So I feel like the previous speakers set the bar, and I'm here to sort of lower it, hopefully gently. And over these past few days, I've sort of been floating around. I've been talking to different groups, trying to figure out what everyone here is up to. So I have to say, I don't... is it working?
Yep. Sure.
Okay. So I have to say, look, I don't have a grand theory of the universe. I have a bit of a personal journey to share. Obviously, I've tried to, usual last-minute rearranging of slides. I've tried to make it, mirror this thing. Excellent. So I've tried to make this thing broadly intelligible and ordered, but largely it's going to be a very personal story with a few interesting idea hooks, and I hope that maybe some of you latch onto them, maybe you find it interesting, and maybe you don't, maybe you go the other way. Those reactions are also pretty cool. So, yay, the machine has Provocateur. So, okay, so brief bio things. So Jill did a fantastic intro, but mostly I write books. I build strange machines for fine-tuning and running local models on. I love building these Frankenstein builds with like hardware that's been decommissioned for a while and still getting them to work. These days I'm learning a lot about potatoes. I'm a farmer now. And potatoes are surprisingly difficult and complex things, as I'm learning the hard way. So this is the general idea of what we're going to do here. I'm going to try and attempt some definitions. I'm going to try and put some ideas. And if that doesn't work, at the end I run away. So, just giving you a heads up, right? Okay, so let's start with some front-loading stuff, right? Let's start with this concept of apophenia. And first, let's check if we have Wi-Fi. Yes, we do. Excellent. Okay, so apophenia is the human tendency to see patterns in random noise, right? The most famous example is this man, this face on Mars formation. This is from NASA's one of the photos that NASA JPL shares. And a lot of people look at this and they immediately see a face because we have really good pattern recognition engines. A lot of this literature originally came from, studies of various pathologies as diseases. But then later on, as the literature improved, it was a given that apophenia was very much a part of how we process the world. And it is indeed a very useful thing. Now, we can go into the papers. We're not going to do that. That's boring. And I think everybody's after lunch here. I don't think you want lists of citations. So I'm just going to show you a video. This is the famous Hader and Simmel experiment in 1944. These researchers came up with this very brief animated film. And they invited a bunch of people to view it. And I'm going to do the same to you. Hopefully this works and doesn't crash. Aha, behold. So I'm willing to bet that almost all of you told yourself a story as you watched this, right? It's a bunch of lines. And the researchers themselves say that they had They didn't have a complex story in mind when they made this. But the fact is that your own apophenia, your own pattern recognition builds a story in your mind as you see this. And for many of you, I think you will probably read it as an abusive family situation. And there are other ways to read this as well. And that's your own pattern recognition kicking in. And so this is the idea that every one of us, we have this instinct towards creating narratives, even out of random noise, even out of just triangles and shapes, just the crudest of instruments. So if you want to subject your friends to this experiment, if you want to see what they see, QR code over here that will take you to the YouTube link, the video that I just showed. If you want to test this on your family, friends, or share this with anyone, go right ahead. But don't worry, you can also talk to me afterwards and say, hey, Yudha, can you give me all the links? This is not a problem. Okay? So essentially, let's go to Terry Pratchett, right? The anthropologists got it wrong when they named our species. We're not Homo sapiens. We're not the wise man. We are Pan-Narrans, the storytelling chimpanzee, because that's how we process the world, and that's how we do everything. That's how we build civilizations and monuments and religions and all these things that we hold dear. So this is what I want to sort of front load to you, this idea of apophenia, and hopefully you'll have seen it work in your own heads, and hopefully that's a little bit better than me saying, go read this paper. So let's start with the story. So how many of you have read Peter Pan? Oh, nice. Okay, so you'll get this reference, right? I loved Peter Pan as a kid. And there's this part in the Peter Pan story where Barry describes finding Neverland. And, it's the second to the right and third on till morning, yes, but he also says, if a child closes their eyes and you see sort of sparkles and things there, if you really look deep, Neverland is there. These islands are there. So as a child, I would just try to scrunch my eyes and then see if I could see these islands. I didn't see a damn thing. Mostly what I saw was that I needed spectacles. Until I read The Ghost from the Grand Banks by Arthur C. Clarke, which is a novel about raising the Titanic. The raising the Titanic part was not at all interesting to me, but what was fascinating was essentially it was my introduction to the Mandelbrot set. There's a character in this novel who's a mathematician, and she's obsessed with the Mandelbrot set, and she spends hours. Essentially, this is for those who are wondering what the hell this is. It's essentially a very simple equation. When you visualize it in 2 dimensions, you get an infinite recursive thing that you can keep diving into forever. And there are people that I learned who, do spend time naming each valley and mapping this as if it was a real place, as if it was a Neverland. For example, in the Wolfram Alpha entry, there's Seahorse Valley over there, and so on. Let me actually show you this. Hold on. Sorry. That's still me trying to break into something. Voila. Okay, so this is the Mandelbrot set, right? Can everybody see this? Is it visible? Okay, so we're just going to zoom in. And we're going to keep zooming in. And we can zoom in forever. We can keep going long past the point where this laptop melts. And this for me was Neverland, right? It was a way of like, hey, there's this, what I grew up reading about. It's here, and I can imagine so many adventures here. I can imagine pirates hiding in these little coves. Seahorse Valley, let me go find it. And the answer is I probably never will. I'll probably find my own valleys there. This is the Mandelbrot set. Now, again, if anybody wants that particular site that I used, QR code here. Again, after this, I'm more than happy to, send this stuff across to you. Euripides, my man kind of got it correct, like mighty's geometry when joined with art resistless. And this really kind of sparked for a while. I did exactly what that mathematician in the Clarke novel did. I would come home from school. I had this ancient Pentium 2 that I had built together with parts from a dump, and while it wasn't good for much, this is basic math. You can use even Visual Basic 6 and do stuff with it and just explore the Mandelbrot set. In fact, I later got into the more complex stuff. This is called a Mendel bulb. Like it's actually been around for a while. This is a think of it as a three-dimensional Mandelbrot set, a three-dimensional object that you can zoom into and explore infinitely, which is very cool stuff, but it was only really sort of usable in a public, in like a common sense way around 2009. There's a nice piece of software called Mendel bulb. It lets you generate these things. And for me, I look at this and go, oh yeah, I can tell stories about this forever. I can zoom in forever. But at this point, I was starting to realize that, there's something's missing. There's not enough here. This is cool, but there's a point at which coolness runs out, and then you have to kind of, go find something else to do. I went looking for Mandelbulb artists, and I found like the work of Horstius and Abalo, who would make these incredible sci-fi landscapes out of these infinitely zoomable, impossible geometries and objects that you could explore and tell stories with, right? And that was cool for a while, but again, something kind of felt missing. They felt like looking at a still life, very cool the first time you see it, but you see 1,000 and then it's how many times can you paint the same orange? So, in 2021, I wrote a book. I decided that, it's like, so I had been a science fiction writer for a while. Started publishing in 2017 and, things were going good. I decided that, instead of writing about cyberpunk themes and post-cyberpunk themes, let me try and enact them, let me try and be that. So basically I wrote a book about humans and like AI on a backwater planet and this very Wittgensteinian alien intelligence that doesn't really care. Oh, for your HDMI cables apparently. But it doesn't really care whether you have starships and fancy engines. It cares about whether something is playing the language game. Like this thing is the tiniest beacon of a much, much older machine civilization. It has its own theory of how flesh becomes machine and literary machines emerge later and so on. And it's kind of looking at this really shitty poet that has landed for this very horrendously botched salvage job and going, that thing is ugly, but it's trying to do something. Let's go talk to it. So for the planet that is so set on, I modified the code by a developer called David Stark. He wrote a planet generator. There's a guy called Zarkon, and you can see an example of, the kind of stuff that this generates. So Selectrum 2, apart from free frozen lakes and rivers, it's dry sinkholes dot the land. Not a lot, but enough to really get the imagination going. I created a character generator system and an interaction system that would basically show characters interacting and give me like the emotional states as a result of that interaction. And weather is simple, like whether you can do with Markov chains. I think a lot of you were learning about Markov chains in earlier workshops. Weather is super simple. And at the time, OpenAI's GPT-2 had just come out. And there was this massive blog post that they had put out. And I had been working in natural language processing, like a lot of my published work is in corpus linguistics. Particularly for low resource languages. So I had the tools on hand to explore this thing and go, I know how to retrain this. This was before ChatGPT, but when OpenAI was actually shipping the weights, and you could take it, you could install TensorFlow, you could try and melt your laptop, and you could make it do stuff. So I did this. I kind of sat in the middle. And I was going off like, this was my inspiration, right? There's a guy called Tynan Sylvester. He made a game called RimWorld, which is an incredible game. Like that title from Wired is, I played RimWorld for 700 hours. I may never escape. The only way to describe RimWorld is as a story generator. And the developer behind it, the QR code takes you to this specific blog, which I think is really worth reading in full because he had spent so much thought into this. He talked about the history of what he called the simulation dream. This effort in game development circles to really create a world so fleshed out and so fully realized that every interaction with it potentially leads to any number of stories chaining together. That, so complex that edge interactions that you would otherwise never have imagined would create stuff, would create stories, would really get you in there. So for example, he starts with this thing by this producer of Ultima Online. Have any of you played it? Okay, so we have one Ultima Online. Ultima Online was a massively multiplayer online RPG. It was great stuff when it launched. But one of the producers talked about like this system that they built where nearly everything in the world, from grass to goblins, has a purpose. And not just as cannon fodder. A virtual ecology affects nearly every aspect of the game, from the very small to the very large. If the rabbit population suddenly drops because some adventurer is trying out his new like weapon, right? Then wolves may have to find different food sources, for example, deer. And the deer population collapses, the local dragon, unable to find the food he's accustomed to, may head to a local village and attack. And all of this happens automatically, and it generates numerous adventure possibilities. Now, that system was scrapped from Ultima Online before it released. They said that it was because players just didn't notice it. They would just kill all the rabbits and then kill the dragon as well. I think potentially, this is where it's computationally intense to do this stuff, right? You don't make a lot of money off it. But Sylvester's blog post is a fantastic exploration of this whole thread and where it comes to in modern gaming. So I read this, I went, aha, that's cool. Let's build that. And let's sit in the middle and imagine that I'm the large language model and these things are prompting me. So we did that. So, for example, this is, I have, like I said, a system going, hey, here's a character, right? Might be Anna, Amanda, Aparna, Aranya, Agrawal, okay. Location, she's appeared in Arjuna, she's appeared in Deus Olympus, and Boat Murdered, and Kartika Highway, which are planets. And then has skills, like he's trained, has medical skills, he's a hacker of some sort, has combat skills, caring, social, has paranoia, extreme depression, and PTSD. So now my brain is going, okay, who the hell is this? How the hell did she show up on Kartika Highway? And she a doctor? Is she a medic? Why does she have combat skills? Was she a combat medic? So that turns into, the story of who she is. Grew up with everything she wanted, high social skills, ditched everything, becomes an army doctor. And you know why it doesn't compute? Because Anna doesn't exist. I don't know who the hell this person is. And this is from the perspective of the main character, who's an AI. But, died on the microplanet Wayward Child. This imposter has showed up on Arjuna 3 and has been hopping outwards, Deus Olympus, Boat Murdered. And because of the time delay between database syncs, right, you can actually escape bureaucracy. Just use light years. And then here's an interaction system, which is hidden by my head. But basically, it's going, Anna, 5:36 p.m., day 6, Anna, Simon, interaction log, professional, caring, support, professional. So I turned that into where she's cradling Simon as she screams, which, excuse me, Anna, is the stupidest fucking thing you can do because we're in a drop pod hurtling through the atmosphere, right? Just go back to your seat. Day 2, Anna Milo, professional, okay, irritation, professional. And this turns into this whole thing later on where Milo turns out to be a bit of a competent, but a bit of a misogynist. He has a history of getting demoted and a history of not working well with other people. By day 33, Anna, Milo, and Simon, all these 3 people are having conversation. Anger, irritation, professionalism, frustration, professional, anger. So now I'm imagining the conversation. I'm imagining what happened. Essentially, I am the LLM in the middle. And the poetry, just talked about. So I retrained GPT-2 on Tang Dynasty poetry. I am not a poet, I have to say this. There are specific poets I like. The Tang Dynasty, 5th century stuff, Du Fu, Li Bai, some of my favorites. May not be a sophisticated choice, but I like how they frame and freeze a moment as if they seek to own it and they seek to just capture this intricate emotion of a particular moment. I trained GPT-2 and I was looking for this very particular touch of the inhuman, as you will. And I read hundreds and hundreds of poems and I stitched them together into the poetry that would ultimately form the basis for first contact and this conversation. And here it's wondering, where these ideas are coming from. Where did that come from? The baby, the crystal lake imagery, where this has come from. And this has plot relevance down the line. And actually, so a little bit of a side detour. The reason I built this thing wasn't originally for the book. It was because I heard there was a Rupi Kaur conversation earlier, right? So Rupika or Atticus got famous, and then a whole bunch of people on Instagram started doing the same thing. So I was browsing Instagram, and I looked at a lot of this stuff, and I went, this is garbage. Like, listen, reading and hitting carriage return in the middle of just writing a sentence and hitting enter in the middle of the damn thing doesn't make poetry. There's nothing here. My machine can do better. So I retrained the 117 model, and I wrote a bunch of Python scripts to simulate a human interacting on Instagram, which is surprisingly easy, and really shitty poetry. But people going, hey, this is awesome. Amazing feed. Would you like to feature on this together? This Instagram account I abandoned it because I got depressed, and I thought, really, this low effort shit is what people are into? Like, someone actually took the time to post a thumbs up. The account is there. It's called Osun Poet. I don't know where the name came from. But then later on, a friend of mine called Dr. Samuel Peralta, who's this oddball physicist, a guy who's designed nuclear reactors. He's a poet. He's a curator for galleries and stuff. He reached out and he wanted to co-write with a more sophisticated person. So I said, all right, let's train a new one. And purely by circumstance, this thing ended up on the moon. I wish I was kidding. It's not. There's also a few short stories of mine. It's a very cool side story. But yes, this thing, Sonnet for the Subconscious War and Other Poems from the Automaton, was the 345M model. And it ended up on the moon. And then I was left with an AI poet, right? And this thing was giving me ideas. The poetry that it generated was giving me ideas, which then became the salvage crew. So again, I am the LLM sitting in the middle. This is the weather system. It's not exactly the weather system. The original weather system that I wrote had a lot more extremes. But, I just put this in because you guys did learn about Markov chains. If you're trying to do stuff like weather and basic state changes, this is the kind of architecture that you come up with. It's fairly simple. And I realize some of you are going, what is he smoking? It's fine. This is kind of how you do weather. So what I found really interesting about this whole thing was now I'm sitting there. I've got a bunch of programs telling me stuff, right? It's a very, very different mode of working. Let me show you by showing the norm. So when I write, I do this. So I minimize other stuff, yes. But this is how I write, okay? So every idea, this is a software called Obsidian. This is how I take notes. This is where I write. Every single thing here is an idea, right? And as ideas develop connections, I know, hey, there's some interesting stuff going on. I should pay attention to that. This is sort of my second brain, if you will. And yeah, so here's me working on a new language and writing a translation guide, right? And working on like, hey, how do you actually, this stuff. But this is where I work, and it is the complete opposite of the workflow that I found myself in here, which was very much, as opposed to sitting there and being like God, setting down these ideas and going, let me connect this to this. I'm exploring a latent space. I'm almost a photographer as opposed to a painter, right? I'm exploring, and it was terrifying. Because I had no idea whether this book would sell or not. I'm a writer. Most of my income comes from writing. The potatoes are nice, but at the end of the day, right, I gotta pay rent. And this was terrifying because I had no idea whether anybody would read it. I just found it personally very satisfying and fascinating and fun. And I never feared the blank page, because there are all of these things here pinging, going, yo, hey, here's an idea, here's an idea, here's an idea, here's 10 different ideas. And I'm curating these ideas and going, aha. So I entered what I can only describe as a ludic state, a state of playfulness. And this is key to sort of my thinking about this stuff. So these actually, it did well. So you will have seen these books. We did a book club. I think some of you have read the book. The result was The Salvage Crew, came out in hardcover, became a Washington Post bestseller, mostly because I think Nathan Fillion narrated it. So celebrities, if any of you want to write books, get a celebrity to narrate your books for you. That stuff really works. But enough that I could write successive novels exploring that same universe and explore my fascinations with it. So that worked. Thank God I could pay rent. And hopefully, they were fascinating enough to the publisher and to a general audience as well, which I didn't expect. And I found it so much fun to do. But here's the problem. There's always the oatmeal problem with these types of systems, right? You can generate 10,000 bowls of plain oatmeal with every oat in a slightly different location. Mathematically speaking, they're totally unique. But perceptual uniqueness is difficult, as a lot of games and a lot of systems that have tried to do this stuff learned. In fact, I learned this the hard way. Okay, so I learned this the hard way because for the next book, for Pilgrim Machines, the one in the middle there, I thought, okay, I'm going to take some time off work, and I'm going to have fun. Now, we did a planet the last time. How about we do more? And it so happened that I managed to take a week off from work. And I thought, well, God made the world in 6 days. I have 6 days, and I have coffee. Right? So how far can we really get? Let me show you. Let's first minimize this. And welcome to Yuda's star map. We're going to generate a galaxy, right? So let's go for like 1,000 stars because I don't want to melt my laptop. We do want civilizations. Okay, so let's set that to as high as possible. All right, come on, do your planet, do your thing. Yay! So welcome to my little universe, right? So look, right there in the middle, I don't know if you can see it very well, but right there in the middle are a bunch of civilizations. And, sorry, the screen is black. Let's see if we can turn off some lights. Aha. Okay, so this is my universe generator. The really cool thing about this is that you can select pretty much anything. For example, I should have worked on the zoom. And I'm not happy with how light diffuses. I need to work on that. But, this star has star stuff going on. Is it part of a binary system? Absolutely not. What's the temperature? Right? What's the rotation? And pretty much everything in this little universe has its feature set, essentially. And here's another star. In fact, let's go to a planet, right? So planets have planet stuff. What's the type? What's the gravity? Does it have water? Is it habitable? Like, well, what's the temperature and stuff like? Initially, this would basically just output CSV because, like, you don't need a visualization. You can just look at the data. And I only had 6 days. And you can technically encode most of the universe in a CSV. If you can get away with it, why not? Right? The visualization actually was written very specifically for this project, for this lecture, so that I could show this to you. And when Jill wrote to me, I went into panic mode and said, oh shit, I can't show them a CSV. I got to show them a bit. So, we have planets now. But here's the thing, right? I managed to write literally an entire universe. Nice, but it felt boring because there wasn't a story there. There was all these complex systems going on. What did work was adding civilizations, which is also a recent development. As I was tinkering on this for the lecture, I had like a to-do of stuff to do, and some of it was figure out how to add civilizations and figure out how to make them fight each other and colonize stars and planets and all the things. So hey, here's a civilization. I need to work on the user interface, but this is the Gallinori. They've been around for a while. Here are their social traits. Here are all the other civilizations here. And these guys are hostile, right? And we can do descriptions. They've been around for 25,000 years, tech level 4. Very traditional, very xenophobic, very expansionist, very, very individualist. Why does it sound familiar? Particular aptitude in propulsion. And these guys have got all these stars. See, these dotted lines are the systems they've colonized. And they have relations with the Azonaks, who are an anarchy. Having existed for 20,000 years, they have biotech and they have some values, and they're like, friendly with some people, they're hostile with others, they're neutral. Now, I think last night I was working on, here's my VS Code. This is, I'm still trying to break afternoon, but where is So I was working on adding megastructures. So I want civilizations to generate megastructures. Something occasionally pops out, the celestial nexus of eternity. And the whole point of this is creating a universe, cool, totally doable in about 6 days, but not really interesting until you start adding stuff that does make it interesting, until you start adding stuff that makes this little story engine and apophenia in your head go wild. So if you want to mess around with this, absolutely go wild. I've stuck the thing up on GitHub. Again, QR code will lead you there. I have notes in case you want to modify it. I do have to say that don't touch the z-axis. Because I learned to, and this is an act of hubris, right? I learned that to make spiral galaxies, you have to figure out gravity, and you have to figure out why galaxies rotate in a particular direction, and then supermassive black holes, which I didn't have time to do, which would be like a whole, let me not solve the fundamental problems of physics. So it's a bit of a hack. Binary stars do their thing, planets do their thing. The whole spiral thing is a little bit of a hack. Don't touch the z-axis. Things go horrendously wrong, but you can modify a whole bunch of stuff beyond that. And in fact, I think particularly from Nick's classes, some of you would have actually picked up what to modify. And it is exactly in that structure, because you can go generate the celestial harmonic of yogurt if you want to. And, if that's a story, great. So what I learned from this was that you can have complexity, but arbitrary complexity, mathematical uniqueness is not enough for that apophenia brain to kick in. So I started thinking of systems, right, as ludic engines, and they have a few properties. And this is my theory of it. One is they have a procedural rhetoric, and I'm taking the term from Bogost, and also simulation rhetoric from Frasca. Like there are rule-based mechanics that essentially tell you about how this universe or world works. That's a basis of it. It will tell you something about how this reality works. Then there's rituals that form interfaces, right? So mechanics and therefore meaning are wrapped in like these definable and learnable processes. You don't have to really understand the engine, but these processes let you interface with this. And there's a whole range of this stuff. It goes from simple to complex. The simple stuff hooks people in, like, hey, here's a universe, hooks people in. And then, you keep modifying it until your teeth fall out. That's the complex. And there has to be some ambiguity, because a system that is extraordinarily specific, that says 1 + 1 = 2, and has a perfectly deterministic output, is really not fun. It becomes a utility. There has to be some ambiguity, just enough that that apophenia brain picks in and starts creating narratives around why this may be so. Now this is not a grand unifying theory of anything. This is just the way I approach it. I think ludic engines have been with us for a long time. Tarot is a really good example. Horoscopes, Kabbalah, Dungeons and Dragons, conspiracy theories, etc. Now my whole point of this conversation is to say that, hey, because of modern tech, we have a bunch of really cool ludic engines. And downstream from that, we have a bunch of cool digital literature, which is right where you guys come in. So extremely cool stuff. This is literally, I've shot my own slide in the foot, right? So the idea is ludic engines plus apophenia plus computing, you get cool stuff, kind of like a petri dish for the mind. Let's start with an example I think everyone will know, Minecraft. Okay, who has played Minecraft here? Why are there people who haven't played Minecraft? Okay, everybody knows what Minecraft is, right? Yeah. Okay, so Minecraft is really cool because not only is the generated world 8 times the surface of the Earth, which lets us make cool Uranus jokes, but people can build incredibly complex stuff inside them, and they have, everybody and their aunt seems to be building an 8-bit processor inside Minecraft. Someone built a computer that plays Minecraft inside Minecraft. Someone else built hey, here's the Earth in Minecraft, and someone else went, look at that, that's cute, here's the whole universe inside Minecraft. Because of this nature of Minecraft has generated so many stories. Now you might be familiar with Let's Plays, but podcasts Books, web novels. Honestly, some of these web novels, like if you look at Life as a Minecraft Mob, it's got 1.4 million reads. Look, as an author, if I got 1.4 million reads, I'd be dancing out there in the rain for potentially a whole year, and I don't dance.
It's possible.
It's possible. It has been theorized about, but we've never seen it. Virus, a Minecraft story, 250,000 reads, 27 parts. Some of these stories are extraordinary. Some of them are garbage, yes. But people are generating stories because Minecraft is a ludic engine. It invites you to tell stories about the world. It doesn't explain every facet of how it works. You're not going to see the Java code for the generation of the universe, but it gives you just enough that you start going, what the hell is this skeleton? Oh, it's my first day in Minecraft. Let me make a house for myself. You start telling yourself stories. Likewise, Dwarf Fortress. So I've been going around asking people here if they played Dwarf Fortress. I think some of you may have been subject to my cross-examination. How do I explain this? Dwarf Fortress is hell to play. Please don't play it.
Sorry.
Are you sure about that? Well, look, I play Dwarf Fortress as well. Dwarf Fortress is about dwarves in a fortress, theoretically. In reality, it's a simulation that tries to simulate everything, and it is successful at it. And to show you how weird and bizarre this is what happens when you lock people like me, but people a lot smarter than I am, in a room for 10 years, and this is the kind of stuff that emerges, right? It's a management game, right? You manage dwarves in this fictional world. I want to read to you the cat bug. One of the most famous bugs in Dwarf Fortress is what we call the cat bug, because cats were dying in taverns. Simulated cats are dying in simulated taverns of alcohol poisoning. Why? And so there's this interview with the creator of Dwarf Fortress where he goes, well, I added taverns in Fortress mode, right? So the dwarves will go to a proper establishment and get mugs, and they'll drink and things happen and alcohol gets spilled. Now the cats would walk into taverns, right? And because of the old blood footprint code from like 8 years ago, they would get alcohol on their feet. It was originally so that people would pad blood around. But now any liquid, right, when they get it, they get alcohol on their feet. And I wanted to add cleaning stuff. And again, this is the creator talking. I wanted to add cleaning stuff. So when people were bathing, you could make it more real. So I added eyelids. I made eyelids work for no reason. And so the cats will just sit there. They'll pad through the thing. They'll sit there and lick and clean themselves. And on a lark, I went, well, it's a cat. When you do lick and you clean yourself, you ingest the thing that you just licked off. So the cat goes in to a tavern, pads through alcohol, and because of some ancient code, it kind of sits down, and because its eyeballs work for no good reason, it's going to do this and it's going to do this, and because of a bug, an integer bug in how alcohol is generated, it will ingest an entire pint of one lick. And because alcohol poisoning is simulated in this, it will go through all the stages of alcohol poisoning and die. This is the cat bug. So you can imagine how many complex systems exist here, and these edge interactions and the kind of bizarre stories people must have been telling themselves about this before this guy said, yo, I screwed up, this code from 8 years ago. It's really like listening to God sometimes. So, for example, sometimes the simulation throws up interesting errors. At one point, wandering groups of outcast poets or scholars would turn up stark naked. Because, as Town explains, having been expelled from civilization, the simulation determined that they no longer had clothing requirements. And they decided to go au naturel. Now, this is not a suggestion, but this is how the world of Dwarf Fortress works. And this is the kind of crazy stuff that's simulated in here. It's an incredible storytelling thing. It invites you to tell stories. You can't resist. It's a ludic engine. It's got you in its grip. Another one of my favorites. I play this a lot, actually. Probably too much. This is single-handedly the reason I'm behind on this particular book that I'm writing. It's called No Man's Sky. They just dropped a new update. They added trillions of new planets. So we're in trillions territory, and it's incredible. So when you interact with a ludic system, I keep thinking of this guy called Daniel Brown. So he's an architect, writes a lot of his own software. He's a generative artist. On this side, you'll see a bunch of flowers. He specializes in generating these species that have never existed. On this side is actually the cover of William Gibson's Neuromancer, because William Gibson is a huge fan of Brown's work and invited him to do the cover. So Brown's had written code that procedurally generates cityscapes. And it looks so much like the cyberpunk sprawl that Gibson went, hey, can we have this for the covers? And this is from one of his projects. This is called the City of God, I believe. It's developed in collaboration with the Four Seasons, where he's using code to essentially generate and explore tenets of Islamic architecture. And there was this interview done with him, and Garrett, the writer from Wired, said this very particular thing that really struck with me. Brown makes his images using generative software he wrote himself. Enormous complex 3D patterns that he searches until he finds something interesting. This process makes him equal parts magician, equal parts explorer, and equal parts artist. And, going through these things, that's kind of the mode that I've seen people engaging with them in equal parts explorer, magician, and artist. And keep in mind that these are a lot more complex than anything that I've done now. So, if you want to actually check out Daniel Brown's website, again, QR code here. I highly suggest you do, because he's a truly incredible generative artist. In fact, the website opens with a Johnny Ive quote about his work. So he's well known in certain circles. Aside, but the whole point is like, well, what about AI? Isn't AI replacing this idea of creating complex systems and then interacting with them and finding these edge cases? As a matter of fact, like a lot of the imagery that you have seen on this side has actually been from Google Gemini. So I think of something that Garry Kasparov said. Do any of you follow chess? So Kasparov is one of the world's greatest chess masters. 1998, he has two matches against IBM's Deep Blue and loses. And the headlines were very similar to stuff we see today. Man defeated by machine, humanity versus computing, etc. Kasparov came back with a field called advanced chess that I play sometimes. And the whole thesis of that is it's not human versus machine that the future is going to be. The future is human plus machine versus human plus machine. And it really plays into a lot of the literature around us as cyborgs. So we are tool makers, we are tool users, we are cyborgs. Every one of us has in their pocket a device that can communicate instantly with anyone else around the world and send photos all over. I mean, a 13th century king would have killed for a fraction of the power we have, right? So this Kasparov's whole theory is that integration, essentially. And so on this line of thinking, I worked with Google Research a while ago when they were testing out their Lambda models. They built this nice interface for a bunch of us. It was called WordCraft, and this was never released, never made public. They essentially bought a bunch of professional writers and brought us on board and said, hey, when you co-create with this, like try and use this, do stuff, write stories. How do you feel about this? And this was way before ChatGPT sort of really came out. And they wrote a paper about this. They wrote a couple of papers. And my opinion at the time was that, well, this feels like a really tropey fan fiction writer, because it's skewing towards an average, a visible average. Like if your corpus, you have a large corpus, most of that corpus is going to be in that middle. It's going to be average, right, mediocre. It's going to skew towards that. And no matter how hard you try to prompt around it, that's what it's going to be pushed towards. My views have changed a little bit since then. Very recently, this year, I tried to answer the question of, can you vibe code a novel? And I used Claude, and I gave it a very difficult starting seed. And the whole point was something I'm familiar with. Write a book about farming in Sri Lanka, a fictional narrative. Someone from the outside comes in, tries to do this stuff, gets timed by bureaucracy and all of that. And I essentially just went next chapter, next chapter, next chapter. Not very sophisticated work, but it turned into a 30,000 word blog post and a 50,000 word novel, which is linked in this thing. And it was surprisingly, it was still crap, but better crap than most people would do for their first effort, like much better. And in terms of the amount of details that it got correct, in the amount, like obscure details, like Sri Lanka has 2 growing seasons, the Maha season and the Yala season. I didn't expect it to get that correct. and to build a chapter around that and to have consistency across chapters. Context windows are going up. So the answer now is, can AI do a lot of this stuff? Yes, but this wasn't fun. I explicitly wrote about this and said, well, it kind of takes the fun out of everything. It's like offloading. It's basically paying someone else to do your stuff for you. Where's the fun in that? Like, if you couldn't be bothered to write it, should anyone be bothered to read it? So there's some midpoint where you're building tools and you're doing stuff with it and you're having fun and AI is involved as well and you're doing all these quirky things. And then there's a point at which, I think it's a very hazy definition, but there's a point at which you just start offloading your thinking and it becomes boring. So my current thinking is like, the more human it gets, the less interesting it is to me. And currently, it's like there's a very powerful mind of perfectly average taste trapped behind interfaces that are only slowly improving. Like the chat interface is one of the most banal ways of interacting with this stuff. If you really want to have fun, go through the API. But if you use it as a replacement for taste and skill and thought, you get the average, middle of the bell curve. You augment, you might get useful stuff, but as of late, in this push to make it economically viable and usable and to generate billions, they're essentially writing coders and assistants, and again, it's getting more human, right? And there's a whole lot of legal issues, so declare what you're doing, etc. This is my current thinking in a nutshell. I'm using it in a bunch of projects that are interesting to me. I showed you, I think, a snapshot of the language that I'm building. My editor hasn't got back yet on this novel I'm writing about a cat. So I got bored. We're building a language, and I realized that if you can actually define your language well enough, and you can write a very, very, very tight structure and say, hey, here's exactly how you translate it, you can then give it to a AI model and say, based on this, build me a lexicon, and then I can go through the lexicon and try and decide whether my guide is well written enough. Because when I showed this to my editor and agent, they went, yeah, can we put it out there for your fans to read and use? But I have no idea whether this is interpretable to someone. So I can check it for interpretability now. On the right-hand side is basically Claude using the translation guide and using this extensive language primer that says, look, here are the relationships between vowels, here's how you mark status in a conversation, and it's going, yeah, let's give it a shot. Fun to work with, interesting, potentially useful. The other thing that I'm using AI for is my library project. Many of you will have read Borges, The Library of Babel, where in this short story he envisions the universe as a library, and this universe is made of hexagonal floors. Each floor has bookshelves. Each bookshelf has books which are of a specific length, a specific number of characters in a pattern. And this is an infinite universe, and the short story is absolutely brilliant because it is like, this is, the proto-generative literature, if you will, where you just use your brain, and he goes, and the whole crux of this is that if you have such an infinite library generated this way, one of the books generated will be a complete index of all the works in the library. And these librarians are on a quest to find this thing. So I wrote the library. Again, this is a get bored and have a week to do, let's have some fun project. And what turns out actually generating the library is fairly simple because it is a completely mechanical process. The difficult part is many texts, when you generate this way, are noise, they're gibberish. So I have an AI model sitting there tagging right now a few of these things, building statistics, line lengths, paragraph lengths, but critically something called perplexity. Perplexity in machine learning is a measure of, have I seen something like this before? High perplexity means, yes, it's probably in the data set. So it's probably part of the actual training data. Low perplexity means I've never seen this thing before. This looks like garbage or gibberish. And low perplexity stuff is just random combinations of letters. Somewhere in the middle is stuff that has never been seen before, but feasibly looks like sentences in English. So this is turning out to be a very fun project and surfacing. This is literally a screenshot from an email where I was explaining something. And I've been going dumpster diving essentially. So I have this librarian tagging stuff for me. And I occasionally dive in and I find a text that I think is fascinating. And I'm building a bank of reviews of fictional objects, just like Borges did. It's fun. So there are fun uses of AI, but the more human it gets, the more assistant-like it gets, the more they try to shoehorn a transform model into being your perfect secretary / coder / therapist. So to wrap this up, or get close to wrapping it up, here's my plea to you. Go forth and find the machines that provoke. I've now been just throwing stuff at you, and hopefully not all of you have nodded off yet. But look, there's a whole bunch of really cool ludic engines out there. They're often video games. They don't have to be. Follow their trail to the stories that people tell with them. Because this stuff is genuinely underserved, is unseen. Yet in digital humanities field, in the field of electronic literature. And let me show you some examples, right? As with anything, 90% of everything is crap. 10% though is incredible. Remember Tynan Sylvester, like the guy who wrote RimWorld? There's a series of stories called Welcome to Bogdan's Rest, which is absolutely fantastic. A gaming journalist from the site Rock Paper Shotgun starts a hotel in this world. And his whole thing is he's going to set up this hotel, people are going to come and party, and these fictional people are going to have fun. Doesn't really work. Someone brings in a bunch of drugs, like the in-game's equivalent of cocaine, and a whole bunch of parties later, his colonists are drug-addicted fiends, and he's having to butcher and kidnap the guests that are coming in and sell their kidneys to pay off the drug dealers who occasionally visit this thriving colony now to keep his own colonists satisfied. It ends in a horrendous firefight. That actually sounds like something out of the Savage Crew. Like he's dropped his shotgun in the medical ward when he dozed on the drugs. He's clutching the laser pistol Lester had died with. Someone had taken out one of the aliens in a suicidal charge. And Julie, is firing. And meanwhile, the guests are leaving reviews going, they're absolutely amazed with your hospitality because the guests are being pumped full of drugs and their kidneys are being removed and they're completely high. It's beautiful. And it is genuinely fun to read. From Dwarf Fortress comes Boat Murdered, which is 14 players from the Something Awful forums had this brilliant and/or deranged idea of passing a save file to one another so that each person would inherit the mistakes of the predecessor. So it starts out with something like this. Look, a metalsmith starves to death. The mayor has mandated that certain jobs be completed, guild wages, etc. Basic Dwarf Fortress stuff. And in the first logs, this guy is going, well, we're settling in for winter. We've got a bunch of dwarves. Let's get some wood. By the time it comes around to the middle, for no reason, there are mad elephants running around. A whole bunch of people have gone completely crazy. They're carving statues of previous leaders. There are riots happening. And at some point, a mine just collapses and starts flooding everything with magma. And towards the end, it turns into essentially a horror story with the last living child of Dwarf Fortress left. And everyone else has died horrendously. And it is an incredible story, and it will give you mild PTSD as well. But these are examples of the kind of incredible stuff that have been generated this way, that have been created in this state of play. And let me give you something from No Man's Sky. This is Andrew Webster writing for The Verge, saying, for a long time I searched for answers, a reason for the existence of the universe and my place within it. I followed the path of an inscrutable, godlike creature named Atlas, who promised answers but didn't deliver. I tried to solve a star-spanning mystery involving a lost alien, and that didn't go so well either. But I think of all the things I've been able to see and do. I've fought pirate scourges and managed my own fleet of frigates. I've traveled to vast empty worlds full of floating bubbles and flown my ship alongside tiny dragons, soaring through acid rain. I've been chased by giant crabs and uncovered the ruins of ancient civilizations. And somehow, after visiting literally hundreds of worlds, I'm still finding things that are new. Not long ago, I touched down on a planet that was completely covered in giant rotating machines. They were both plants and animals and made me question how much I truly understand the universe. And I'm not sure if anything can top that. And this is him reviewing it. You can see how much this person has been affected by this interaction with this. with a game here. And in a sense, does this not remind you of Tennyson's Ulysses? Little prophets an idle king, etc. But I am become a name for always roaming with a hungry heart. Much I have seen of cities and men and so on, but all experience is but an arch where through gleams that untroubled world, whose margin fades forever and ever as I move. This piece of this game is giving people that feeling and inspiring them to write. So, if you can't find anything cool enough, build your own. You don't have to wait for people to give you permission. This is totally doable. You've seen some stuff that I've done, you've seen some stuff that other people have done. Go do your own thing. Thank you. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it.